Hello, welcome to Post Colonial Space. I'm Masood Raja, and I'm just taking a few moments to let you know that this clip that you will see after this introduction is from one of my online classes, and I've decided to edit them so that more people can benefit from these lectures that I deliver pretty much every week. So enjoy and let me know what you think about it. Thank you so much. So, what I propose to do, I'll briefly talk about the story, and then I would love to hear your opinions. So, The Prisoner of Las Lomas is by Carlos Fuentes, who is probably the most prominent Mexican writers. But he mostly writes in English, and he himself had a very international life. Actually, he grew up mostly outside of America. His father was a diplomat and then went back to Mexico, outside of Mexico. And so for him also, Mexico was a kind of discovery when he goes and settles there. And then he worked in the Mexican civil service and was in the foreign service, served as an ambassador, I think, to France. So he is very internationalist in his approach, right? And in terms of his writing, part of what comes across is he teaching us or any other readers about the richness of Mexican culture, but also about the corruption of the promise after the 1920 revolution, the failure of the revolution. So in a lot of Mexican fiction, one of the biggest themes is the corrupting influence of capitalism, of materialism, and what happens to people and what happens to peasants, what happens to rural communities. Now, do also keep in mind Mexico. I think Mexico City is the most populous city in the world. But Mexico also has beautiful, rich forests and landscapes, and also one of the most sophisticated revolutionary resistance movements in the Chiapas called the Zapatistas, right? And they are the ones who named themselves after Emilio Zapata, who was one of the revolutionary leaders and was eventually assassinated by a pro-American government. So it is that historical backdrop within which he writes. Now, the story that you read, The Prisoner of Las Lomas, is a really interesting kind of a detective story. It's a very modernist story. And our main character is Nicolas Sarmiento, right? And we meet him in the beginning of the story. He's just a young lawyer. And he says that he is going to go and meet this general who is dying, right? That's where the story starts. And the general's last name is Nieves. And there is a secret that our protagonist knows, and he goes to the general on his deathbed and says, your honor will be safe with me if you sign this document. Basically, he coerces this general who is famous for being the hero of the war, people's hero. That's what his entire life's reputation has been. And he blackmails him into signing off all his properties after his death to our protagonist, Nicolas Sarmiento. And then rest of it is his account of living in Las Lomas, the house that he illegally coerces the dying general to give to him. Now, the house itself is a monstrosity, and you can see the description of that in the very beginning of the story. It's a monstrosity because it's from an era of Mexican urban life when people had made enormous wealth after the war, but they were nowhere rich. So they had just put together these huge haciendas, these huge buildings that were incongruent with their surroundings, were not very well laid out, were not very stylistic in any way. But since the house is now surrounded by urban developments, people kind of find it as a historical curiosity and they want him to save it. But that's the house where he has lived for the last 25, 30 years, right? The story also is about the power of information, the power of mobilizing history to your advantage, right? Remember, there's a lot about information. And what he says is that his success, his entire enterprise, getting rich and powerful after he coerces the general into getting his property, was because of one instrument, the telephone and the telephone directory. So as he describes it, in his house, there is a whole telephone exchange with 57 lines, which connect him to all the world's stock exchanges, United States, and everything else. So he's kind of a technological entrepreneur, and he is adept at doing one thing. Any new knowledge that emerges in America or elsewhere, he finds it out, and then he applies for a Mexican patent for it. Right? So let's say television, and he would apply for local production patent from that company. So that's how he ends up owning any new innovation that are being introduced in America and elsewhere. And he gets the exclusive rights to market them and produce them in Mexico. So that is what he's been doing throughout these 25 years, sitting at his house. And he tells you very openly that that's all he does. He has done nothing else, but that has made him enormously rich. Right? Then there are other things in his life. He has committed to not committing to any single woman. Now, the secret that he talks about, which allows him to blackmail the general, was accidentally revealed to him by his first fiancée, Miss Del Rey's father, who was an accountant in the Revolutionary Army. But after he finds the secret and gets the hacienda and everything else from the general, he basically lets go of all his past life, including his fiancée. And then he has a lifetime of, having casual relationships with women, just using them and tossing them aside. Now, one interesting thing about his description of that, and it is very sexist, the language has no respect for women. They are offered as these playthings in his life. But if you read those descriptions carefully on page 184, he's giving you 4 generations of women that he has encountered, seduced, or have had as lovers. And those 4 generations are also 4 different stages of Western feminism. The first ones came from the elite families. The second one were the militant ones, then the ones who are kind of hippy-dippy. All of that is enshrined in that description. But by and large, he has never developed any serious relationship with any woman unless he meets this one woman who is called Lala. And he doesn't even have a full relationship with her. All that happens is that she gets mad at a servant. She throws the drink at his face. He takes her to the bedroom and puts her on the bed. And when he goes back, he also falls asleep. And in the morning, when he wakes up, he finds out that she has left the room, but she has been stabbed and she is dead. Right? That's what all we know about Lala. And we find out that one of his servants with whom she had an argument, Dimas Palermo, is the one who killed her, and he is arrested and put in jail. No one knows when his trial would be. Right? That is roughly the surface plot of the story. But we realize that this is the first time he actually has fallen in love with someone because he cannot get her off his mind. And that is when people start showing up outside his house. Now, do also keep in mind that he has never kept any loyal servants. He employs them for 3 years, then gets rid of them. And so he's a deeply paranoid man. He doesn't want anyone to get to know him that well. And then he realizes that these people have started camping outside his home. They are, making tortillas in his garden. They have invested the house. And when he goes and when he finds out that he literally is a hostage in his own house, and when he goes and talks to an elder gentleman, he tells him, look, Sinor, you think we'll get tired? We are not going to get tired. We take turns. Some of us come and stay here for a week. They go back. The other people come and take their place. We will stay here until our brother, Dimas Palermo, is released from prison. If for as long as he is in prison, you will also be in prison. That's the deal. So meanwhile, he develops a relationship with this older gentleman, and he finds out that he was actually there at the massacre of Santa Eulalia, right? Where famously General Nieves, whom he had blackmailed, was also there. So what is the myth of the Santa Eulalia? The thing that he has mobilized to gain his early wealth was that the rebel troops, they capture this small hacienda, they line up the people who own the land and everything, and the servants and everyone else too. There are two commanders there, right? There is General Nieves, who is a captain, and there is Andres Solomillo, who is the colonel. Now, the legend says that Solomillo ordered the troops to shoot the family as well as the servants. But it was Nieves who said, no, we are revolutionary troops. We don't kill our own people. So both officers order the troops. One orders the troops to shoot at the people. The other orders the troops to shoot at each other, right? So finally, the legend, the public belief is that it was Brigadier General Nieves whose order was followed, and the troops kill Solomillo. And that's how he becomes a popular hero, right? But our protagonist knows, and the older gentleman that he's talking to also knows, that no one survived the incident. The people were killed, the soldiers shot each other. No one had survived that. And that's where his statement about information comes in, that history is there. These people have known these facts, but they never did anything with it. Whereas what he does is, when he finds out that all the officers had died, right, he used that information to his advantage. How? He immediately then knows that the guy dying in the hospital, who is considered General Nieves, a hero of the people, actually was not Nieves. How does he know that? Because his information tells him that all the soldiers there died. It wasn't that one group of them was a hero. So anyone who took up the name of General Nieves was actually an impersonator. And that's the secret that he takes with him when he goes to the fake general's deathbed to blackmail him, right? And when he's talking to this older gentleman who's leading the group, who's investing Los Lomas, right? He knows that these people know the whole story, but they are not connecting the dots. So he prides himself for knowing that and for mobilizing it. But the people are smart. He says, okay, I'll make a call and they'll release him. And so, the people say, no, we have seen this before. You'll get him released. We let you go. And then they'll arrest him and put him back in the prison. So our condition is that we will leave you alone when you admit to having killed Lala. Right? Now remember, Lala was introduced to us as this woman from nowhere. And then our narrator tells us he saw her in the garden, saw her again. Then we get her backstory that she actually had a daughter. And so this young woman that he's seeing in the garden was Lala's own daughter, and that tells us that she had a history. She had lived a life too, right? So by the end of the story, they have reached a sort of a compromise. The compromise is that Dimas Palermo will stay in the prison and he'll be taken care of. He, our protagonist, Nicolas Sarmiento, will stay at his hacienda, but he won't go anywhere. And the people will stay around the hacienda. Right? That is the final compromise that they have reached. Now, all of this is staged through a telephone conversation. Okay, he is telling this information to the 57 telephone lines on the other side as the last act that he's going to perform, which connects him to the public. Because at the end he says, here, I'm severing this connection to you. Now you know the truth. And the question to the reader and to people on the other end of the line is, you have the information, right? What are you going to do with it? So in so many ways, I find this story really interesting because we do have a protagonist who is completely amoral, unapologetic about using knowledge to his own advantage. He might come across to us as cruel, right? But think about it. Anyone who claims that being entrepreneurial means that you make more money and the means don't matter, right, has the same kind of mentality. I have this information, you don't. I know how to use it. So what? This is capitalism. Those who have information can use it. They succeed because they are innovators. Those who don't, they lose, right? So it's that morality which we see as jarring and maybe as an aberration. For so many people, that's the kind of morality they have, right? Because they don't care who gets hurt because they are intentionally not trying to hurt anyone. They are just trying to make money, right? Because making money is maybe what, noble or whatever. So he gives us this example of an amoral entrepreneur who never even thinks of the consequences of his actions about the women, but also his responsibility to anyone else. His idea of success is, I'm going to own all these patents. I'm going to throw big parties. I'll be powerful. And that's the kind of life he has lived. So I don't know. I don't kind of draw lessons from the stories, but this is a pretty interesting story because it leaves the ending open. We don't know, is he going to leave or can he leave? But we also don't know how they are going to resolve this. The only compromise that they have reached is that he takes care of Dimas Palermo while he's in prison, but he has decided not to sign the declaration that he will take the blame for the murder. So they are in an impasse. And the impasse is that he lives there and people live outside of his hacienda in his gardens, and they have reached this sort of a compromise, an equilibrium. But this is also the first time he is now in a situation where he's severing his connection to the world, the telephone lines, but he's getting to know these people. And he knows the little girl, he knows the cook, and maybe there is hope for him. So that's how I read it, as a maybe finally he is forced to acknowledge other people, and if not become a part of that community, at least be dependent on them and maybe get to know them on a human level. Because as you read his story, you know that he has used a lot of people, he has used a lot of women, but other than Lala, there is no one else that he actually loved or missed, after he had used them. So that's where I'm going to end it. I would love to hear your views about it. And, what do you think about it? And let me know, and then I'll be happy to answer your questions. So this concludes this edited version of a live lecture. I'll be back with more, and please keep an eye out for these, and I hope these are useful to you. Thank you so much, and as always, peace and love.